This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Christians are being set up to take the fall for the evils of this world in what one researcher called the greatest double cross in history. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. As I've been going through the archives here in what's becoming a series for a couple of reasons. Number one, still working on a lot of projects that take up time that could be devoted to interviewing new guests, but also because it's dawned on me after the very positive response the last couple of weeks to interviews from years gone by that we've got quite a body of interview audio archived that you may not be aware of. Sharon and I started PID Radio back in 2005, and before arriving here in the Ozarks back in 2015, a lot of what we did was kind of on the down low. So rather than let all of that go to waste, because I think some of these interviews deserve to be heard again, and this week is one of those. We were contacted in the winter of 2005 by a man from Washington State by the name of David Duncan. Dave reached out to us after hearing PID Radio. Somehow, we'd been doing it for about 6 months at the time. This was in the early days of podcasting when Apple was still openly trying to solicit new podcasts to fill the iTunes store, which no longer called iTunes, is now Apple Podcasts. But we were early in podcasting. Less than a year after the code for syndicating podcast audio was made available, we started doing PID Radio, which has led to where we are today. Anyway, Dave had a story to tell, and it is quite remarkable. It's about something he calls the New World Order scam. And I should say called the New World Order scam because he's gone home to be with the Lord. He led an interesting life. He was a man of science, a chemist by trade, but back in the 1960s, Summer of Love, Haight-Ashbury, he was pursuing chemistry of a different sort and encountering some very, very interesting people, one of whom went by the nom de plume of Alan Michael, his actual name Allen Noonan, a New Ager who was propagating a different gospel, and it led to, again, what David called the New World Order scam. So from December of 2005, an early episode of PID Radio now with our guest, David Duncan.
Well, thank you, Derek.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
Hi, Sharon. How are you doing?
We're doing fine. What's the weather like out there?
Well, it's sunny. It had been heavily overcast. And then yesterday, all these chemtrails, they were laying down all over the sky.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
Do you find that your sinuses or anything act up right after that?
I've never had that kind of reaction. And we only see these, I guess, once every month or so.
Do you ever get
I understand other places are even worse.
Do you ever get the little string precipitation that comes down?
No, I haven't.
So now you're in Washington near Seattle, is that right?
No, actually, I'm in the other side of the state, north of Spokane.
Okay.
Not too far at all from mine. In fact, actually, the Idaho border is only a few blocks away.
Okay. So now you are in the sciences, am I correct?
Yes, I am.
And what do you do, David?
Oh, I'm a chemist, and I've spent most of my career doing process development chemistry. What I specialized in is the separation of organic substances out of natural mixtures, such as phenolic mixtures and terpene mixtures. Mm-hmm. And we worked on various methods to purify substances after they're separated out of these kind of mixtures. And in the 90s, the group that I led developed a string of patents for phenolics and dihydric phenols known as catechol. Sharon, you probably remember catechol.
Oh, I barely remember those. Organic chemistry was sort of how sometimes when you're studying, there comes a point as you're taking more and more advanced classes that you eventually hit a brick wall. Uh-huh. You probably never hit that brick wall.
Oh, yeah, I did.
I saw the brick starting to go up as I took my second organic chemistry class.
Uh-huh.
Well, the reason I wanted to touch just a bit on your career, Dave, is to make it clear to listeners that you are someone who does have a scientific mind, someone who's familiar with the scientific method, with observation, experimentation, and replication. All of the Asians that you have to go through in doing science, and so that you're coming at your conclusions with the mind of someone who is used to the scientific method and not someone who leaps to conclusions.
Worldview.
Exactly. Now, you've put together a fascinating website, the title of which is The New World Order Scam. And after you contacted us, Sharon very perceptively realized that you were onto something here and that we needed to talk to you and kind of kick around your ideas here, because you come onto some things I think that Christians in particular really need to think about. Yes. But before we get to your conclusions or your analysis of what might be ahead, let's talk a little bit about your background, because you come at, you might say that you began your study of chemistry in a rather unorthodox way.
A little bit early.
I hear incense and peppermint again in my head.
Yeah, there you go. That was it.
Yeah, I did. I was into amateur astronomy when I was a kid, and my parents knew that, and so they bought me one Christmas, I think it was 1957, a book called Exploring Inner Space. And it was filled with just these fantastic descriptions of what it was like to take LSD. In fact, it was...
Okay, so they mistook that for a book on astronomy.
Yes, they did.
Oh, missed it by that much.
Well, this really piqued my interest, because it was right about that same time in my life that I had just a very profound spiritual hunger. And so I channeled my spiritual hunger in that direction. Of course, that was a mistake, but nonetheless, we all learn.
Mm-hmm. So you then, if you were young enough to be getting Christmas gifts in the late 50s, you probably came of age in the 60s.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, were you on the West Coast during the 60s?
Uh-huh. Sure was.
Well, that was I was a little young to know about that myself, but I hear that was a pretty wild time, especially.
Oh, that was. It really was. My first days were in Seattle, and I used to hitchhike to San Francisco and back up and down the coast in 66 and 67. And so I spent a lot of time in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco.
Haight-Ashbury.
We're going to put a link to your website because the URL's a little long. Otherwise, I'd give it out now. But you've got to go there, folks, and read all about Dave's, teen years, 20s years, the exploration years, because it's a fascinating tale. And any of you from the West Coast, you may actually relate to it. I was actually in Indiana during the 60s, and we didn't have a whole lot of this going on.
The closest I came was in Chicago during the, Democratic Convention of 1968.
Oh, yeah.
But I was 6 years old at the time, so I didn't notice.
Yeah. You were not there picketing or anything, were you? No. Wasn't allowed to go south of Division Street, which is 2 blocks away. Well, you know what? First of all, we want to tell our listeners that you are a born-again Christian.
Yes, I am.
You weren't. You came later to that, didn't you?
It took a while to get me to come around, but I did. And that was about 1982 when it finally dawned on me that that is the correct understanding of all of these things.
So how do you get from experimentation with chemistry to working as a chemist?
I suppose it's a spiritual journey. And for me, that began in those times of my life so long ago, and then I went to San Francisco, and I arrived in town broke, essentially, and so I didn't have much choice about things. I needed to find some kind of employment. And I went into a restaurant that was a Zen macrobiotic vegetarian restaurant. And the fellow over on the other side of the counter was a man in his 40s, and he took a look at me, and we struck up a conversation. He says, well, hey, we've got a house with a whole bunch of hippies living in it, and you can go there, and there's a mattress there, and all we need is, you come here and work a few hours every week at the restaurant. And so I said, hey, that's a pretty good deal. So I took him up on it. That began an interesting journey, because it turned out that this fellow, his name was Allen Noonan. He turned out to be an occultist, and he had just an amazing comprehension of what we have all come to call the plan, which is, generally speaking, the occult worldview, and how it regards how it would go about taking over the world for occultist purposes. And so I began a journey then that understanding what this man had to say, and he had a lot of things that he taught about the plan, or how an occult world takeover would come about. And I remember that he was among this group of people that was called the California Desert Contactees back in those days. And these were actually a number of fellows. George Adamski comes to mind. Mm-hmm. And they had all more or less one thing in common. They had experiences with UFOs out in the California desert in the early 50s. And Allen was among those people. And Allen describes these events in his life at that time in the early 50s. And apparently it was at this time in his life that he began to learn and understand all of these things. And so then switch in here now to 1966 when I first met him. And then the next summer was the summer of 1967, and that was really the big event in Haight-Ashbury. There were over 100,000 hippies gathered there at that time, and by this time we were living next to Golden Gate Park, and we were actually, the house we were in was next door to Janis Joplin's house.
Wow.
And we were about a block off of Haight, and right next to the Golden Gate Park. And I remember the whole commune, went for a hike on the ocean beaches north of San Francisco one afternoon. And I just glanced out over the surf, and something caught my eye up in the western sky, and I think it was perhaps 200 feet away from me, and it was a disc, and it looked like it was made out of aluminum, and it looked like it may have been 50 feet in diameter or something like this, and it kind of rolled in perspective, and it was just a perfect classic what they call a daylight disc. And I was excited to see this, and I shouted out to everybody, "Hey, look at this," and by then it was gone. It just simply blinked out. It disappeared. Hmm. And Allen just kind of gave me a knowing smile. He seemed to understand just exactly what it was that had happened. And, other people have said, and I've read other people having said that these things did tend to follow him around, and that it was not all that uncommon for UFOs to be seen in his vicinity.
That's interesting, because we were watching the presentation that Bill Schneblin gave down at the Ancient of Days conference in Roswell from this past summer. And
Are you familiar with Bill?
Yeah, I've read some of his stuff on the internet, yes. Okay,
so you know what we're talking about.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and he mentioned that that was a very similar experience to his while he was training under a Grand Master Druid down in the mountains of northwest Arkansas. I don't know if that's Eureka Springs down in that area, but somewhere in northern Arkansas, the Ozarks. And he said that it happened dozens of times while they were down there studying that summer.
Oh, yeah.
And again, when they asked the master about it, and he just gave a knowing smile and said, "Let's just return to our studies class."
That's about it.
So what happened then?
That summer I remember in June of 1967, it was really a memorable day for me. And you know how images and pictures kind of lodge in your mind and you remember them for the rest of your life. And I remember one sunshining day walking out across the grass of Golden Gate Park and thinking to myself about the amazing things that had just been happening in Israel that past week. It was a 6-day war, the 1967 war, and early part of June, and somehow that all seemed related in some way that I couldn't at that time really comprehend to the things that we were living through, and that has stuck in my mind all my life. And then it was only perhaps a week or two later than that, one Saturday night, probably was the most memorable event of my life. We were all sitting around in this big old Victorian home. I think there were 35 people all together at that time, and it was Saturday night, and it was party time. And, we were having good times, and then about 3 a.m, something happened that just absolutely knocked the wind out of everybody there. About 3 a.m, suddenly there just fell this hush over the whole room, and I glanced over at Allen, and he was sitting on the couch. And I was just shocked to see his appearance giving away to a completely different appearance. It seemed like he became enveloped in a cloud of light, and then he appeared to be just radiantly glowing, and he looked like an Eastern Zen master, he looked very Tibetan, actually, like what you'd expect a Tibetan Rinpoche to look like, or a Tibetan adept. And it was just profoundly beautiful. He just was like an angel of light, just radiantly glowing, and he was just completely overshadowed by the entity that had been invoked into our presence in some manner, in some way, and I've never understood exactly how, because I wasn't aware of what might have been going on that would lead up to this event. At any rate, all of us in the room were just absolutely stunned. We were just in a state of shock. And then this entity stood up and walked over to where we were sitting and looked at us and said, "I am Lucifer."
Still glowing?
Yes.
Still radiant?
Yes.
And of course, Lucifer being the Latin form of the Hebrew Hillel ben Shakar, meaning light bringer, son of the dawn.
Yes. Yeah. So
wow.
He went back over to the couch and sat down, and then the event was over, and then Allen resumed looking like Allen. But what was just amazing during those few minutes was how completely, totally, the extent to which Allen no longer looked like Allen. It was just amazing. The overshadowing entity here just completely modified his appearance. And, it was about 8 years ago that I ran into somebody who was finally able to explain to me some more things that I've never comprehended. And this person had been in Sedona for a few years, and of course that's the big New Age community down in Arizona, where a lot of channeling takes place. People will channel various entities, and what this person told me is that it really isn't all that uncommon for this phenomena to take place, that a person doing channeling can be so completely overshadowed by the possessing entity that their appearance just completely changes to the appearance of a spiritual being. And that was the first and only time in my life that I've had corroboration of what might have taken place that night. Other people have seen this too. And so that was interesting for me to be able to put it into a context like that. Channeling.
Did this guy begin a new occult ministry at that point? Did he change as far as the way he behaved, as a human?
Well, no, actually, it didn't seem to be even a hiccup in Allen's behavior and his teachings, or not really. But what happened shortly after that, and I think by this time it was 4:30 in the morning, Allen, there were just a few of us who were really interested to see more about what it is that had taken place. And there were perhaps 4 or 5 of us, and Allen took us all the way up to the top floor of the old house in his bedroom, and he reached into his chest of drawers and he pulled out in an old occult book, and he thumbed to a page that was just this most beautiful pen and ink drawing, and I've never been able to locate it, and I've tried the rest of my life to find where this might have been, but as a work of art, it was really quite stunning. And it showed a drawing that was entitled Lucifer Rising, and it showed this haggard angel, his clothes all tattered and beat up, and he was rising up out of the black, inky depths. He was rising up out of the abyss, and he was rising up into just this most brilliant white light at the top of the picture. And that was a very striking visual image, and it's something I'll never forget as long as I live.
Now,
the appearance of that pen and ink drawing.
You're looking back on it now through the eyes of a Christian, but at the
yes,
time,
I am, and this corresponds to Revelation 9, and what we're looking at here is the beast from the bottomless pit. This is how occultists perceive the event. rising up out of the abyss, an angelic entity. I don't know if others have had these same thoughts, but I've thought all my life long about, who is Lucifer? And from about 1980 to 95, I studied everything that Sitchin wrote, and I was just assiduously studying all of his books. And by that time, I was firmly in a biblical worldview myself. And during those years, I was attempting to see if anything might correspond between what Sitchin was writing about, and I wanted to see if there was anything that would correlate or correspond to a biblical worldview. And those years were a laborious process because it as it turns out, it's very difficult to make correlations.
You don't get this in Sunday school.
No,
no, you sure don't. I've thought about who Lucifer could be, and I know that most Christians, their understanding is that Lucifer is Satan. And to be honest, I question that. I have wondered myself if Lucifer might... the Bible is silent on this.
Right.
There are texts in Isaiah that describe Lucifer as the son of the morning. Mm-hmm. But I've wondered if Lucifer might correspond to Merodach. Now, we know that Enki, and I think you've been talking about this with Peter Goodgame, mm-hmm. Just splendid interviews that you're doing with him. He correlates Enki with Satan. Mm-hmm. And if that correlation holds, and if also we believe that at the end of the age that Satan is going to counterfeit the Trinity of God, then I think we should expect to see Satan also have a Trinity of his own. And how I view this is that Lucifer could indeed be not Satan, but the son of Satan. And of course, the most famous son of Satan is Marduk.
Mm-hmm.
Enki, right, because Marduk in the Babylonian pantheon was the son of Enki, right?
Yes, exactly, yes. And so now the Bible in Jeremiah 50 mentions Merodach, and I tend to think that this correlates with the son of Satan myself.
All of this corresponds with Crowley because he talked about Lamb, and I think his adherents refer to, do they actually say Horus, but they're talking about the slain son who's going to rise?
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
That's it. Well, the Revelation chapter 9 talks about Apollo or Apollyon mm-hmm. rising, and if Apollyon is Lucifer, and if Lucifer is indeed Marduk, the son of Enki, then I can see why we're in the Middle East. It's a continuation of the Apollo program. The Apollo program originally put us on the moon, and I think presently the Apollo program has ventures in the Middle East. Now, if Enki corresponds with Neptune, mm-hmm. or Poseidon, and Neptune, there's that word root, Nep, N-E-P. Mm-hmm. Perhaps Enki also corresponds to Alans, and Robert Temple wrote the Sirius Mystery, and he described how Berossus, the Babylonian priest, mm-hmm. had first brought us the story of the fishman god. Mm-hmm. And Neptune is a fishman god out of Eridu.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Of course, Enki was the god of the sweet waters, the abyss, mm-hmm. which mm-hmm. was below his temple at Eridu, the Abzu. Right.
Mm-hmm. So today we have the fish hat popes and the cardinals with all of their fish hats.
Mm-hmm. And the Merovingian line that claim that they go back to, is it Dagon?
Yes.
Yeah, the fish god.
Exactly.
And the ichthys symbol for Christianity.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Oh, wow.
All of these things, you see, the biblical worldview and the occult worldview have points of correspondence, and they're coming at it from 180 degrees.
Right.
Completely different understandings, but the same topics throughout them seem to have a lot of points of commonality.
Well, exactly. In fact, the gentleman, Allen, that you were talking about, isn't he the one, I know you linked to several other sites that are off of your own site to
yes.
explain these people that you used to interact with. and study with. This gentleman seemed to think that he was essentially the comforter that Jesus promised.
Yes, exactly. He saw himself in that role. Yes.
We're talking with David Duncan, who has got an excellent website in which he outlines what he believes to be the New World Order scam, and we're in the process of examining some of the points of correlation between the biblical worldview and the occult worldview, which, if I understand correctly, offers just enough truth to hook you in, and then hit you with, and then throws a curveball and leads you down the wrong path.
That's it.
It's fascinating in that the response of most Christian teachers today is to avoid the topic altogether. That, rather than examining it and trying to learn and study and know thy enemy, the response seems to be, no, let's just not even go there.
Mm-hmm.
Which leaves a lot of Christians who are, of curious mind, more vulnerable than if they had actually been prepared for it.
Especially if you're younger, because you know this, Dave. When you were younger, you're very curious, whether you're a Christian or not. You're very, very curious. And if someone comes along, pays attention to you and says, you know what, you're special.
That's what happens,
Yeah, and Daniel Eaton, who is a contributing editor at Watcher Magazine, wrote a very interesting piece, which we just posted yesterday, and he makes a very good point, in that while we are busy trying to protect our children from a fictional character in a pointy hat who rides around on a broom playing Quidditch, we are avoiding the very real supernatural that Harry Potter is supposed to lead to. Mm-hmm. And that is where the real danger lies.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're really pleased to be talking with you, especially from your firsthand experience of meeting Lucifer face to face. I don't think there are many among us who can make that claim.
and all my life I've tried to weigh that on the scales, and ultimately I do come to the conclusion that that's exactly who I'm at. Thought about that a lot, as you might imagine, and
sure.
That's my conclusion.
That's not exactly the sort of thing you can bring up at the office. At least maybe on Casual Friday, but no other time. So, you're in Haight-Ashbury, and you've had this experience with Allen Noonan. And he's laying out for you the plan, things that he believes are going to take place in the end to sort of turn the tables on Christianity.
Yes, exactly.
How does that plan unfold?
Well, the plan as he understood it, I think one of the most important parts of the plan was the concept that by the time the end of the age would arrive, that all of the really important positions in finance and government and industry and corporations, all of these, in entertainment, the arts, media, religion, all of these institutions would be controlled by occultists in the higher level positions. And that was an important part of what he taught in the occult takeover. And, he viewed it as a Masonic takeover.
Okay. Now, as you know, we've had some discussion with some folks over the past weeks, including an upcoming interview with Eric John Phelps, when he discusses the Masonic influence and the control of the Masons by the Jesuit order. And we've and so you're saying that the influence is not just in the lodges around America and Europe, but throughout government, finance, entertainment, and religion. It's everywhere, basically.
You mean it's not Republican and Democrat?
No, it's occult at the highest levels.
And that's the other point I wanted to get to. While I think there are some evangelical Christians who would be inclined to agree that the Roman Catholic Church may be under the influence of dark forces, I think a lot of them will also take comfort in saying to themselves that, at least our religious leaders are still okay. Our guys like Robertson and Falwell and D. James Kennedy and Phyllis Schlafly and Tim LaHaye and Beverly LaHaye and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to point to any one of them in particular and say, that any of them are.
You just named them.
Yeah, but I'm just picking names as our most prominent evangelical leaders. But are you saying, or would Allen Noonan say that those positions of leadership within the Protestant Christian community in America have also been infiltrated.
Yeah, well, that's certainly what he implied. Of course, that was 39 years ago. But that's exactly what the implication is that occultists are and have been making a very special effort to congeal their positions of power, and that those positions of power would be all across the board in all of our institutions, education, religious, the entire establishment.
Russ Dizdar talks about the Black Awakening. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that this is a big game of risk.
Yes.
Get all of your pieces in place, and then you set off the trigger.
Yeah, the trigger. Mm-hmm.
And I guess the position, things are almost lined up.
Yes, they are, yeah. And you know how the cartoons on Saturday morning picture this weight on the end of a rope, and the strands of the rope one by one are popping. It goes pop, 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 pop. And you just cringe because you know the weight is going to drop. It just amazes me that the strands are still popping, and it hasn't come down.
Well, you know what? God can hold it together when we see nothing there.
That's it. Mm-hmm.
So now, what would you see from your study over the last, say, 25 years or so, and what you see in politics and in the news today that would indicate that, say, the more prominent leaders in American Christianity are wolves in sheep's clothing?
Yes, right. Well, there is something that's been going on these last couple of years in the Jeff Rentz published some articles about it. It's regarding the Reverend Moon.
Sun Myung Moon, the Unification Church.
Yes, the Unification Church. And I don't know how it came to be, but Moon somehow became a billionaire in the process of starting his church. And one of the projects that he's embarked upon in the United States is to fund and create the CNP, Council for National Policy.
Okay.
And the CNP is a very wealthy organization, as you might expect. Mm-hmm. And they have managed to put very timely amounts of money into the hands of people in evangelical Christianity who, are at points of need, financial need. And
that's right. Didn't I hear that Jerry Falwell was that his
correct.
University, Liberty University, was bailed out by Reverend Moon, wasn't it?
Bailed out, yes, exactly.
Oh.
So he was in a position where he could use some money, and Moon took care of it. And,
no strings attached, of course.
Huh?
No strings attached, of course.
No strings attached, of course. Now, you wonder about that. Of course, we can't really know about those things that are going on behind the scene, but, I mean, how could you assume otherwise?
I'm sorry, but it doesn't matter. How can anyone who calls himself or herself a true believer, a part of the body of Christ,
take money
from a man who claims to be the Messiah?
Mm-hmm.
You just couldn't do it. You couldn't, and you should not.
Mm-hmm. So, this whole Christian right-wing evangelical, at least ostensibly it would appear that they are, this whole movement has been largely responsible for putting George Bush into power, and George Bush is his re-election was pretty much guaranteed by evangelical Christianity. And of course, all the Christians think that they're putting up a fight for a biblical or what remains of what was once a biblical constitution and a biblical nation.
Right.
And we think that we're securing, hold the deck and draw the line. And we need to move toward a conservative government. And I think that this has been is being used against them. It comes back to, for me at least, George Bush Sr.'s very famous New World Order speech, and I think that must have been on 9/11 of 1990, where he used the term New World Order.
It was.
And that kind of, for me at any rate, brought to a close an era of time during which, if you wanted to read about the New World Order, there were 2 or maybe 3 obscure mail order book houses that you'd have to go to in order to get books on that topic. Mm-hmm. And ever since that time, that speech of his, the field of study called the New World Order has just exploded on the scene. And at the moment, the New World Order is approaching a multi-million-dollar industry. It's got to be. But what is interesting about it is a very large share of the industry, and I might call it an industry, New World Order information industry. A very large share of it resides in the context of New Age thinkers, New Age folks. For instance, Rense.com, that's an example of what I would call occultish left, left-leaning people who have a New Age paradigm. Mm-hmm. And the impact of this threat of a New World Order is now being perceived as a big thing by New Agers.
And who do they blame for it?
George Bush. Mm-hmm.
And his supporters, the conservative Christian right.
Yes, exactly. That's it.
Okay.
So the New Agers have honed this thing to the point where they're what they feel is the greatest threat to them is this horrible Bush-type New World Order that George Sr. got started on he got the ball rolling way back then. And the Bush dynasty, of course, is associated with Prescott Bush, the grandfather of our current president. And Prescott is known to have supported Hitler. Mm-hmm. So people in the occultish left or the New Age movement, they perceive all of this as a very great threat to their dreams of metaphysical lullaby, New Age.
I like that. Metaphysical lullaby. Remember that phrase.
Well, there are a lot of serious crimes that the New Agers are saying Bush is responsible for, and certainly not the least of them would be our own Reichstag fire. 9/11.
Sure.
And, JFK researchers point how Jack was trying to get us out from underneath the Federal Reserve with his executive order. What was it? 11100 or something like that.
Yeah.
In other words, what JFK apparently was doing was trying to get us out from underneath the financial domination of the Rothschilds, and so. And people who research the grassy knoll are fond of telling us that George Bush Sr. was probably not too far away.
I've heard that. I've also heard Nixon was in town.
Yeah.
So with these thoughts in mind, that the New Age perceives the Bush administration as being a fascist organization in cahoots with neocons, Jewish people, or at least ostensibly Jewish people, then the whole stage is just set for the Bushes to go down really hard. And, the Bush family, how people say, well, it's all in who you know. It's all in who you know. And myself, I kind of think that the Bush family motto might be kind of more like, it's all in who you take down with you.
In this case being the conservative Christians who have supported and believe that they're doing a good thing by voting for an allegedly conservative Republican.
That's really interesting.
So the New Age or metaphysical or occult communities right now are being polarized with the Christian right, and we're looking at the potential for a divided nation here. And of course, I think the Bushes themselves, they're doing all of this with a wink and a nod to their fellow occultists, and people just don't see that aspect of the thing going on.
You put together an excellent page in your site showing all of the numerological connections between the various events of the last 50, 60 years, all of the 11s and 5s and 6s and 3s. It's mind-boggling. I mean, as you mentioned, 11 years to the day between the New World Order speech and the attack that took down the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
How many days was it exactly between the invasion of Iraq and the landing on the carrier?
Well, let's see. Now, there was exactly 555 days
555.
until from 9/11 until the ground war began, and then it was exactly 18 months.
18666.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. It was 555 days until the air campaign began.
Right. Okay.
And then it was 18 months until the ground war began. And so, here we have 555, and we have an 18, which is 666. And I guess the reason I wanted to document these things in my website is because I want to show that the Bushes are very connected to cultists. And I think, people would have to go in and dig into my website in order to see all of the details that are there. But I think that's important for me to make my case in this thing. It's important to provide evidence that the Bushes are occultists from day one. All of them. Skull and bones and the whole thing.
Sure, and things that I hadn't even paid attention to at the time. When he landed on the carrier deck, wasn't it May 1st?
Yes.
5-1, which is what, Beltane?
Mm-hmm, yeah, Beltane. And David Meyer, Last Trumpet, put together an excellent summary of that, and I quoted him on my website. And it just reveals the depth to which occult numerology is implicit in everything that the Bush administration does.
Our guest is Dave Duncan, the author of I guess you'd call him an author, because the website has certainly got the depth of a really good book, The New World Order Scam, showing how Christians in America are being taken for a ride by occultists posing as the conservative right. Dave, now you mentioned some of the connections between the prominent conservative Christians and the group supporting the president, the Council for National Policy, and the link to Sun Myung Moon, who, of course, has blasphemed is the only way you can describe it, by calling himself the new Messiah or the true Messiah.
Oh, he does. He's not the only one calling him that.
Oh, he had himself crowned by congressmen in Washington, D.C. Was it last March?
Yeah.
March of 2004. There's an excellent blog out there, by the way, called Where in the World is Sun Myung Moon? And the author's name is escaping me at the moment, but I'll put a link to it in the show notes, because it's really eye-opening when you see all of the people of power that Moon is connected to.
He's traveling with now.
Exactly. He's traveling with Neil Bush on his 100-city tour promoting world peace. Interestingly, one of his programs, Moon's, and this is just a bit of a rabbit trail, so I hope you forgive me, was to convince African-American churches to take down the crosses, African-American Christian churches to take down the crosses inside their churches, because it's a symbol of divisiveness. And until the very last minute, the White House had directed that there were no crosses displayed during the inaugural parade in 2005, January 2005. And finally, some Christian groups complained loud enough that the administration backed off on that request. But it is interesting, and it makes you wonder how much influence Moon really has with this White House. And who are his handlers? I mean, I know that he's got connections with Korean intelligence, which, of course, is heavily tied in with the CIA. We know that there are some strong strains of occultism inside the intelligence community and things that have been happening in there. And we're really getting into some, through the looking glass type stuff here.
Well, we really are. We'll go back to the plan. How is that proceeding?
I guess, the last element that we should ramp up about the plan, or maybe the last two elements, would be that Allen talked quite a bit about how there would be a double cross at the end of the age. And I think what was implied by him speaking about this is that the Christians would go down pretty hard. In fact, he talked about how UFOs would be involved in what he called natural removal of the Christians, how the people who were not able to evolve into the new order of the ages would have to be taken out, and he felt that they would be taken out by a natural process that would be assisted by the UFOs. In fact, he mentioned that the UFOs would use little plasma fireballs, and of course this remains yet in the future, so we'll have to see whether or not that comes true. But the other thing that he talked about was how that there would be just this strange twist of fate at the end of the age, what he called the double cross. And the double cross, of course, reminds me of the cross of Lorraine.
I knew we knew you were going there.
Yeah, we were looking at each other.
And of course, that brings to mind the recent story of Scott Gillespie.
And the Black Sun Society uses the double cross as a motif, and so does a major New York-based oil company.
And that's the image that Scott Gillespie is allegedly to have carved on the back of Pam Vitale.
Yes, I remember that. This is just a few weeks ago.
Right. Well, you mentioned the oil company, of course. You're talking about ExxonMobil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there are a lot of people in the world right now who are extremely upset with the Bush administration for what they're doing in the Middle East, the war and everything. And this past year, there have been a lot of rumors floating around about how our president is relapsing back into alcohol, that he's showing serious mental strain and perhaps even mental pathology, that he has explosive outbursts of temper among his staffers. And I think a picture is being painted here to make this whole thing believable. I think that George Bush is ripe for the role that he's playing on the world stage. And at some point in time, he could just kind of disappear off the stage, and all of the horrible cumulative effects of what he's done in his administration, of course, that's a New Age point of view, would collapse upon the thing, and then everybody would be looking, well, who put him back in office? Who supported him? How did we get into this fix? And if this triggers World War III, if we have a short nuclear World War III, as Pike envisioned it so long ago, well, people are going to ask, well, who's to blame?
Who's to blame? We need a scapegoat.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's those Christians who...
And next summer we have a movie coming out on 666 called The Beast, and it's about the fact that the movie claims that Christians made up Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, my take on this thing is that the term, there are three words, New World Order, are just so closely and tightly associated with the Bush family that I'm just wondering if all of the folks who are researching New World Order are barking up the wrong tree. I think that at the last minute, the occultists could bring in an occult world government and finish everybody with a bait and switch and leave the whole New World Order high and dry, and everybody will be hating it and pointing to it and say, oh, well, wasn't that a horrible thing? And look what it caused. It caused Armageddon. They could refer in retrospect to the nuclear war in the Middle East as having been Armageddon, and of course we know that's not true. Mm-hmm. But the world does not. And the world would not comprehend the differences between a nuclear war in the Middle East and what would be what we expect as Christians, the second coming. And that's the real Armageddon.
Speaking of the Middle East, you said something a little while ago that really piqued my curiosity. You were talking about the Apollo program on the moon and how it's being continued in the Middle East.
Apparently so.
Could you?
Yeah, I mean, the Twin Towers were a gigantic 11, and if you look at Revelation 9 and Revelation 9:11, and said they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and Greek tongue Apollyon. Now, we know that if this beast that's rising out of the bottomless pit, we see in Revelation 9 that there are really strange things that are being released out of the pit with him that are rather like scorpions with the power to sting and torture. I come back to the possibility that the son of Satan could be this Apollo. Mm-hmm. Or Marduk.
Right, or what the Egyptians called Horus, or Tammuz.
Mm-hmm. There seems to be at least a possible correspondence here that the beast from the pit would be the son of Satan, Lucifer, as I would see it.
So another Apollo project, but this time to free Apollo from the abyss.
Yes.
Perhaps in the manner described by Stan Deo, by use of some Tesla technology to open a portal.
Well, yeah, and that was just amazing, his insight about what a ziggurat might consist of. He mentioned that it would be rather similar to a step-down transformer.
Right. And in fact, he shared with us a stele that showed Marduk appearing at the top of a ziggurat with hordes of fallen, perhaps sacrificial victims, lying along the side of this monument. And I'd be happy to send you a copy of that. We should probably post that too. Ask Stan's permission and then post it so people can see what we're talking about. Yeah. But it's really striking.
Yeah.
Now, here's what I think is really interesting about this. You start with Crowley, who tried to open up a gateway.
Yes.
And then you go to Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, who tried to open it up even further. Yes. Well, you compare that, at least in my mind, I compare that with the belief of some Hebrew scholars, rabbis, who believe that they have to get that temple built because the Messiah, and they don't, of course, agree that Jesus Christ fulfilled that role. They're awaiting their Messiah, which, of course, we know he's already come. But they believe that the third temple has to be built for Christ to come through that eastern gate.
Yes.
Now, we also have the dominionists here in the United States and in Great Britain who believe that they have to prepare the world politically for Christ's return. And now we've got the new world, the occultists who are opening gates and preparing for Lucifer's rising.
Trying to bring
all the same thing.
Trying to bring back the Lovecraftian great old ones.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who you describe as the beasts of the abyss, the fallen angels who've been cast down into Tartarus.
It's amazing to me that the same lie is packaged in at least 3 different ways.
Yeah, it just keeps popping up.
Yeah, and even more amazing that rather than teaching this in church, in Sunday school, if not from the pulpit, but at least in Sunday school classes at our Christian churches, we are, as Christians, for the most part, unprepared for this because we aren't getting any of this. This might not be something you want to teach to kids under the age of 12, but when you're beginning to come of age and understand a little bit more of the world, it would seem to me that this is the kind of information you would want to have before you go out and face the atmosphere at college or
exactly.
In the world. And it's something that the Christian church has really avoided for the most part. And I'm not quite sure why. Do you have an opinion on that, David? I mean, you think it's just afraid of passing out too much information being dangerous?
Well, the preachers are all trained in the seminaries of religious institutions, and those go all across the entire spectrum, but they all have to maintain a semblance of respectability.
True.
Intellectual respectability. And if they get a little too far out on out on the edges, that it's not a very respectable position. And I think that the whole occult aspect of this thing, the threat that we're facing, it's just wrapped up, kept away, put under wraps. And people don't grasp what's going on. And any topic like this that elicits a reaction of fear, and I know from my own family, my extended family, I'm thinking it's just impossibly difficult to try to communicate about these things because people just throw up iron bars immediately. You cannot go there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Derek said a few minutes ago that he's not so sure that you could teach it to kids under 12, but, I think we probably can.
I think you could.
And I think if it's done right, that's a great time to do it, because kids under 12 are falling from the time that they're watching cartoons.
Well, that's true.
Well, Walt Disney knew about this. You take a look at all of the stuff he was doing in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, yeah. Kids are under the sway of this, and
sure.
You don't catch them early.
Yeah, and they did. They caught him early. If you go back and look at some of the things that Disney was doing in those years, there's a whole bunch of occult inferences that are made into the minds of children at that point in time.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
That's right.
Chuck Missler has a very interesting observation with which he starts his PowerPoint presentation on the return of the Nephilim. He says something like, polydimensional mathematics can only be comprehended by two types of people. The first are specially trained mathematicians who have taken many years of schooling. The second are young children.
Yeah, right. That is so true.
And it's also true that if you don't have your worldview pretty well set by the time you're 18, well, you do have the thing is you have your worldview pretty well set by the time you're 18. And if it's not a biblical worldview, by that point, the odds are pretty slim that you're going to change after the age of 18.
The building blocks are all in the ages up to 12 or so. When you get into the teen years, you become, things start to seem less concrete, and so you're exploring, but you're doing it all based on those building blocks from those earlier years.
Yes, right. And then that's why I was so lucky that I was brought up in a Christian home, because those building blocks were in place, and I could relate to them later on when I was learning different things.
Amen, and that is so biblical. No matter what happens, if you give them a good foundation. And you know what? We have been saying this, and I think you'd agree, Dave, that you don't have to run away from any of this with your kids.
No.
In fact, I know not all parents may do it the way we did, but when Harry Potter came out, we actually, Derek read the book with her. And it gave us an opportunity as a family to discuss what about that book laid traps for kids.
Right.
Yes. Well, what my parents learned when I was a kid is that laying too heavy a stricture down, I was not permitted to do a lot of things, and a very, very tight rein was put on me. And the result of all that was that I went into extreme rebellion. And I think this is what happens with children. If you say, don't put beans in your nose, they're going to do it.
I actually swallowed pennies all the time.
Yeah.
But, the very thing you try to prevent could end up being the very thing that's thrown in your face and bringing up children. So.
Well, now to summarize the thesis that you've laid out and document at your website, the New World Order scam, American Christians are being led by prominent leaders, evangelicals, who have encouraged us to continue to support a political party rather than going back to the Bible and checking the works of our leaders against what is scriptural. The net result being that we've engaged in a war for profit. In fact, have been doing this for years and years. If we go back and look at history, at least since the Teddy Roosevelt administration, if not further.
Sure.
And we are polluting and poisoning the Middle East. We didn't even really talk about this, but with depleted uranium, which is just leading to some horrendous mutations and illnesses there, not just in the people who live there, but in our soldiers who are coming back.
Yes.
People like Dave and Joyce at the Power Hour are doing some great research on that. This is all going to come out someday. You can't hide all of this.
No, and you're right. It will be blamed on.
And it will be blamed on evangelical Christians who put this administration into power. Is that summed up pretty well?
Well, yeah, and what was it? Just a few years ago, Bush White House was sending out Christmas cards that showed the phoenix, and of course, in mythology, the phoenix is the bird that self-ignites and combusts in this great fire, and from the ashes it rises again. And this really does remind me of George Bush. I think that he is a suicide figure. I think that he is purposefully playing a suicidal role on the stage. I think that, history is going to be such that he'll go down with all kinds of things to blame on him, but he probably just sort of disappear in the ashes. It's like I said on my website, if this is the case, if he's taking us Christians down by suiciding himself, that's pretty heavy, That's a dirty job, but it could be that the Bushes are saying, well, it's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it.
And certainly they're being compensated for their role. So you've got occultists on the left, New Agers who are getting ready to point the finger at the occultists on the right, who are leading us down this path. So we've got the Hegelian dialectic there, and from that conflict then will come the true New World Order.
Yes, right.
Which will be, of course, an occultic-based New World Order.
Right.
I think that the words New World Order are going to go down with the Bushes, and I think that they're going to have a new name for it. It's going to be an occult world order. But this New World Order per se. I think it's going to become a dirty word.
Well, yeah.
And it already is. You look at how big the movement is among the New Age people right now. I mean, this whole thing about the New World Order is just taken off explosively, and it's all over the Internet.
Well, sure. I think that it's just too obvious. There's no deceptive value there. It's like thinking that anyone who's demonically possessed or under the influence of the evil one is going to look like, Linda Blair from The Exorcist.
Yeah.
That's too obvious.
Telling a child, don't go with a stranger. And the child thinks stranger, ooh, ugly, mean, scary, monster.
Yeah.
No. Could be a really nice old lady that comes and says, hi, your mommy told me to come get you.
Yeah. And Paul made it very clear that we shouldn't be surprised when that happens, because Satan himself can appear, as you saw, David, as an angel of light.
Yeah.
So we are, as Christians, once again, being called to use our brains. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And that means not following along just because a prominent figure who is interviewed on Fox News regularly says this is what we should support.
Here's what we just found out about Fox News. They were just recently, was it just recently that the money was in?
Within the last year or so, yeah.
Yeah, they're partly owned by the Saudi Arabian royal family.
Oh,
Fox News.
Yeah, a very prominent member of the Saudi royal family, very wealthy billionaire, multi-billionaire, fifth wealthiest man in the world according to Forbes, has invested heavily in Fox News and is now openly bragging about changing the reporting. You notice that Fox News doesn't say homicide bombers anymore?
Right.
Yeah, well, apparently this fellow's taking credit for it. Mm-hmm. And yet Sean Hannity goes on the air and has the gall to rip anybody who dares disagree with the Republican Party platform.
Yeah, right.
And, going so far as to call them un-American. That's just, I won't go that way.
But people who are spellbound by this whole Fox perspective, this is nothing but trouble.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we were taken in at first, too, because it was such a welcome change from what we were seeing on CNN and MSNBC and ABC.
Spent several years in front of CNN, you're ready. For a change.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it, and it's probably intentional.
Yeah, sure. We even bought Sean Hannity's book when it came out. And today Sharon made the comment, now if we had a choice, I think I'd rather invite Alan Colmes over for dinner.
Well, we seem to kind of bounce back and forth between the ends of our cells.
Well, there's one thing that never changes, though, and that is God.
Yeah.
Scripture. Yeah. And you can always find those answers there. So, dig in the newspaper, but dig in the scriptures, too. Interpret what you read.
Right. That is the anchor to which we have to hold, and that is the plumb line against which we have to measure what we see around us. And
absolutely. That reminds me of how you wrapped up your first interview with Patrick Heron. It was just so wonderful because I think the last 5-10 minutes of his interview, he was just quoting biblical verses, and it was just so wonderful. It just felt so good to hear those things said once again.
Yeah, I'd like to have him and Alan Colmes.
Because if Patty didn't have Alan...
I think he could convert Alan Colmes. I
think he could. If anyone could. Yeah.
If anyone could, he could. Yeah.
Well, we need to get a true Irishman like Patty on Fox News instead of those fake Irishmen like O'Reilly and Hannity.
Yeah. So are you going to write a book based on all the stuff? You've done a lot of research, and you've had an interesting life.
It has been interesting. All of these things that we talk about and that PID is all about are just the things that I've been passionately interested in all my life, to try to assimilate these things and build some kind of a perspective. And what amazes me is that still, obviously we're constrained to remain within the confines of what is prophesied in the Bible, but it's just astonishing to think of how, of the amazing kind of variations that could take place, how things totally unforeseen and unexpected could take place and still remain within the framework that the Bible has pictured for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how broad the worldview is within the scope of Scripture. Sharon and I have talked about this many times, that as writers, there is such a so many colors with which to paint when you're writing. I mean, you've got everything in there. You've got dragons, you've got wizards, you've got demons and angels and epic battles of cosmic proportion. And yet the Christian church, for the most part, has, as well as our friend Daniel puts it, has neutered the Bible. Has taken most of the supernatural elements out of the Bible. And now we're saying, no, all of that stuff ended at the apostolic age. That doesn't go on anymore. We don't do exorcisms, not since we discovered psychiatry and psychotropic drugs.
So God ceased to be supernatural, eh? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, how many of our seminaries push that worldview onto the people who are supposed to go out and teach the next generation of Bible-believing Christians. It's a secular worldview. We have to maintain a respectability, so we cannot teach that there are other supernatural entities other than, God, Satan, and, that's it. And he's on a leash and doesn't really get around much anymore. So, well, Dave Duncan, it has been a pleasure talking with you. We'd love to talk with you further sometime. Can we touch base with you again in the future and have you back?
Absolutely. You betcha.
We will put a link to your website. Is there an email address people could use if they want to send questions to you about some of the things that you've learned?
There sure is. On the front page of my website, I give my email address.
Okay. Well, we'll link to your website from the show notes so they can go there anytime they want. And I recommend bookmarking it.
Absolutely. It's well worth the read, and David links to a lot of fascinating articles that document what he's based his conclusions on. It's just fascinating read. The New World Order Scam, Dave Duncan, thank you for being our guest on PID Radio.
You betcha. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Sadly, Dave Duncan is no longer with us. He's gone home to be with the Lord. In fact, the last time we brought this interview out was on a PID Radio episode back in 2012, and we were pretty sure that he had already passed on by then. But his writings are still archived on the web, and I will have those linked in the notes, so make sure you check those out at VFTB.net. Coming up, an important announcement about what was supposed to be a conference and then a tent meeting in California, and Big Tech goes after Christian ministries online. That's ahead as A View from the Bunker continues.
There were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that. It was a time of gods and dragons.
This was supernatural war between Jesus, God, and the old gods.
We live in the final stage of a war that began before God said, "Let there be light."
The gods of ancient Sumer.
These giants are all through the Bible.
The things that are going on in the world right now, I'm sorry, but the writers, they're out.
Now, a fresh look at the end times that reveals the prophecy of the giants at Armageddon. Names the four horsemen of the apocalypse, already loose in the world today.
These entities are real entities and not just metaphors or symbols.
And they're all named.
Unmasks the ancient dragons who walk the earth during the Great Tribulation.
A primordial entity such as Kronos or Chaos, Leviathan, Tiamat.
His breath kindles coals and a flame comes forth from his mouth. What is he describing here, if not a dragon?
And unveils hidden prophecies of their ultimate destruction. Giants, Gods, and Dragons by Sharon K. Gilbert and Derek P. Gilbert. New from Defender Publishing.
Talking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us on social media at View from Bunker or at Derek Gilbert. And remember, Derek is spelled with as few letters as you can get away with. D-E-R-E-K. On Parler.com, it's actually Parler because it's en français, but Parler.com, Derek P. Gilbert. The easiest way to keep up with us is the free mobile app, and we've got links to the app stores for Android and iOS devices. Brings all of these interviews to you as soon as they're uploaded, and you'll find that in the right-hand sidebar at VFTB.net. One of the things that really struck me in going back and listening to the interview with Dave Duncan again was, besides the audio quality, the equipment available to us now in 2020 is considerably better and less expensive than it was back then, and I've learned a little bit because I didn't learn much during my radio days about audio processing. Learned a little bit since then, not to overdo it. It struck me that the need to bring back that Dave Duncan interview was, well, it's very timely as we approach the election in just a couple of weeks, because just as during the George W. Bush years, Christians are being blamed for the evil that has befallen this country. If anything, it's worse. It's a little different in that back during the Bush presidency, Bush 2, we were blamed for supporting him and getting us into a war or wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that at the time of that interview were just barely 2 years old. We had no idea in December of 2005 that here 15 years later we would still have American soldiers on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan and now in Syria. Thank you to President Bush or President Obama. Syria would have been unthinkable. But President Obama, like President Bush, Clinton, Bush before him, play ball with the global elites. President Trump is not playing ball, and for a different reason. The mainstream media, Hollywood, they demonize Christians who voted overwhelmingly for President Trump in the last election, and I suspect probably will again in just a couple of weeks. So the timeliness of Dave's interview, the interview with Dave, who has gone home to be with the Lord. We reran this interview, I think the last time, back in 2012. So 8 years ago, at that point, we were pretty sure that Dave had passed on. But his words survive on the web. They've been archived, and it's worth taking a look because I think the same scenario applies. We're being set up as the evil that must be eradicated on this world. And should there be some, well, global event that shakes the world to its core, where millions, if not billions of Christians around the world are literally taken out of the world all at once, what we would call the resurrection or the rapture, there's an answer already prepared and waiting. They've been taken away. Now we can become humanity 2.0 because they were holding us back. This is a New Age lie that's been propagated for decades. And that is part and parcel of what Dave Duncan was hearing during the Summer of Love back in 1967 in San Francisco. We miss him. Good man. And we were blessed to have had the opportunity to speak to him just a few times, but exchanged a number of emails with him. And we know that he is, well, we look forward to meeting him one day, as we know we will. So, a couple of things to tell you about. This has been a strange week. Of course, you know about the Hunter Biden hard drive. I really feel sorry for Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, whose brother Beau appeared to have been the golden child. He died of cancer not long ago. Hunter Biden obviously has a substance abuse problem. And sadly, he financed that substance abuse problem by selling access to the White House. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. The laptop that he dropped off at a repair shop in Delaware and then failed to go back and collect again. To me, it is mind-boggling that somebody could be so incoherent, so mindless, so thoughtless about how that information might, a psychologist might say, well, secretly he was hoping to be caught. Well, maybe he was. Rudy Giuliani, the president's attorney, but also remember a former U.S. attorney who helped break up the 5 families, the mafia families that controlled New York City during his time as U.S. attorney, who really put a lid on crime and made New York a fairly safe place to visit during his time as mayor. It is not that way anymore. Rudy Giuliani shared a tweet or rather a text message that was saved on that MacBook that Hunter Biden had dropped off at that repair shop. And it's really pitiful. I feel sorry for him. Apparently this was a message he sent to his daughter, complaining about not getting any respect, and then saying, okay, but that's fine. I guess that works for you. But at least I don't make you give me half your pay, half your salary, like Pop, referring to his dad. Now, couple that with the information that was released by the New York Post on Wednesday when they dropped that bombshell of a deal that was worked out with a company in China that is kind of known as the unofficial second foreign ministry in China, where they set up a $1.5 billion deal with this brand new financial services company that Hunter Biden and his buddies were setting up. And according to Hunter and Joe's brother, had to reserve 10% ownership for the big guy. And according to Fox News, a disgruntled former partner of Hunter Biden's confirmed to Fox that the big guy referred to in the email is Joe Biden. Now, I know that the major media is trying to spin this as a conspiracy theory or as a Russian intelligence op, but do you really seriously believe that that's how they would present the story if this had been, say, Donald Trump Jr. caught in these circumstances? Not on your life. Because for the last 4 years, they've been trying to tell us that Donald Trump is in the pocket of the Russians, based on no evidence whatsoever. In fact, when you look at what we know from the leaked emails from Hillary Clinton, and now these leaked Hunter Biden emails that were lifted from the laptop that he left at a repair shop. The reason the repair shop owner called the FBI and got rid of it out of his shop was because Hunter Biden never bothered to call and get back in touch or pay for the repairs. So what we know from that information is that what they've been accusing the Democrat National Committee, what Joe Biden, what progressives and the media have been accusing Donald Trump of for the last 4 years is just what Hillary and Joe Biden have actually been doing. It is unbelievable. But again, it relates to the interview with Dave Duncan. They hate Trump so much because he is standing in the gap between them and the ability of Christians in America to practice our religion without government interference. So we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks. But it's interesting that the same week that dropped, we saw another interesting development. This past week, on Thursday, a number of very prominent YouTube channels were dumped. Independent news channels like the X22 Report, which had 950,000 subscribers, the SGT Report, 630,000 subscribers, Edge of Wonder, 467,000 subscribers, Praying Medic, 391,000 subscribers, The Amazing Polly, 375,000 subscribers, etc., etc., etc. Skywatch TV, we've escaped it so far. And here, I mean, if you're watching this on my own personal YouTube channel, I think we're at, 12, 13? I haven't even looked in a while. We're like small potatoes compared to those folks. But isn't it interesting that they all got dumped? And in the same week, the folks over at Prophecy Watchers were notified by the company that hosts their videos that their contract would be terminated at the end of the month. This same company has been giving Hear the Watchman all kinds of grief, disrupted their virtual conference, and they've also dumped L.A. Marzulli. So they are coming for Christian ministries. And the thing that's amazing about Prophecy Watchers is that Gary Stearman is the gentlest, most gracious man I think I personally know. And yet their channel is going to be dumped, not from YouTube, but from this other company I'm not even going to name, for hate speech. Hate speech. I mean, they're going to go after Prophecy Watchers. Skywatch TV is not going to be far behind. So we're looking into other options for Skywatch TV. But that happened the same week as the big media dump, or, well, let's say the media ignoring the bombshell dropped by the New York Post on Wednesday. Ooh, things are getting interesting out there, but Jesus told us these days were coming. And the other interesting thing I got to tell you about is that here the Watchman was notified also on Thursday that the hotel that they had planned to use for their conference in Irvine, California, November 5th through 8th, so just a couple of weeks out. Now, they had to change the conference to a they were planning to change it to a tent revival. Just an open tent revival, because registrations had been slow. The state of California is still continuing to frighten its citizens into believing that we're all going to die from the coronavirus. So they were really in danger of taking a real bath on the finances. And so they were going to basically bring in the folks who could speak, who lived in California, to minimize their expenses, and then just open it up, no cost. Anybody wants to come, we're just going to have a big tent revival and pray for California and pray for revival. Well, they were notified by the Hilton in Irvine after the Hilton received several inquiries from local media in California that they would no longer be able to abide by the terms that they had agreed to in terms of what they would allow, social distancing and so forth. We can only allow X number of people, and you're going to have to sit 6 feet apart, and we're going to have to do this and that. But the curious thing is that the Hilton was tipped off by local media. They said they had several inquiries from local media as to how they would handle this Christian revival meeting at their hotel. And it was pretty clear to hear the Watchman that this was pressure being applied by local media, or at least that was how it came across to Mike. So anyway, that event has been canceled altogether because, as a condition of allowing this to proceed, the Hilton wanted names, addresses, and phone numbers of everyone who signed up to attend the revival meeting so they could do contact tracing after the event. Now, the contact tracing would not be done by the Hilton. It would be done by the state of California, which means the state of California now wanted a list of all attendees. And to their credit, Mike and Jeannie said, we're not going to do that. So we're not coming. So however many rooms they would have filled for the nights November 5th through 8th, forget it. Those will be empty now. Isn't it interesting? The social justice warriors would rather just lose money by getting rid of a rather prominent Christian media ministry, paying for their services, by the way. It's not like YouTube where it's free. And the Hilton, intimidated by the state of California into demanding personal information from anyone who wanted to attend this Christian gathering and then turn it over to the state. Again, Jesus warned us these days were coming, so be not afraid. The Last Trump virtual conference does continue through November 9th, but be aware that the videos are being hosted by the aforementioned company. So if you want to sign up, I would recommend doing so soon and watch as many as you can in the near term. You'll find out more information from hearthewatchmen.com, though. They will have the latest on how that situation is unfolding. Prophecywatchers.com. Lots of watchmen. Prophecywatchers.com, and they will tell you more about how that situation is unfolding. So it looks like our next face-to-face gathering will be in March of 2021, the Decoding the Supernatural Conference. This will be a small one in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. L.A. Marzulli, Sharon and me, and Jeff Jansen, who is the pastor, Jeff and his wife, of Global Fire Ministries. This will be an interesting gathering. I gather that Jeff and L.A. have some common friends, friends in common, I should say, not common friends necessarily. We're all pretty uncommon in this strange milieu that we operate in. Some friends in common from years gone by, but, I was raised in very liturgical churches. So for me to be entering a gathering that is very much in the charismatic side of the spectrum, this will be a really interesting gathering. But maybe the Lord is bringing together different streams of faith to help strengthen the remnant. I think that's what's going on here. So globalfireministries.com is their website. We'll tell you more as we get closer to that date. And as of now, we're still anticipating being in Israel in April of 2021. April 18th through May 1st, we'll be there with our colleagues from Skywatch TV, Donna Howell, Allie Anderson-Henson, and Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat. This is a tour that will be like no other in Israel, because not only do we see the standard sites, Jerusalem, Masada, the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, we go to the archaeological sites that other tours won't visit, like Gilgal Rephaim. We plan to visit the Serpent Mound of Bashan, which is right there at Gilgal Rephaim. Probably spend a better part of a day, I would think, on those locations and talking about why we're seeing all of these places. Plus, Zev has got some fascinating research on the actual location, the historic location of the resurrection, and the crucifixion of Jesus. They're not on the tours. The crucifixion site is a parking lot. And the tomb of Jesus is from which he resurrected is below the church of the Pater Noster on the Mount of Olives. But the church doesn't advertise it as such. So, again, we'll be going some places other tours won't, but it'll be like a virtual conference on wheels as we go through the Holy Land and show you these sites. The altar of Joshua, Shiloh, Bethel. And then if you take the optional extension to Jordan, we'll go to Mount Nebo, which God called the mountain of the Avarim, which means travelers, which was the term applied by the pagans around ancient Israel to the Rephaim, in other words, demons. So we'll explain why that's important. And of course, Petra, which is incredible. If you want more information, including sample itinerary and cost and so forth, you'll find that online, skywatchinisrael.com, skywatchinisrael.com. Thank you for listening and taking time out of your schedule. I hope this was a blessing to you. A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House and released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our announcer is DC Good. Next week, Dr. Judd Burton joins us as we talk about Gobekli Tepe and, well, it's kind of our annual Halloween-themed episode, so we'll deal with the spirits of the dead as well. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.